So I'm sure like I've already heard a couple of you folks already saying like, what else is out there? What else should I be learning? Or like, how can I learn? And quite honestly, maybe you've also started to feel like you're hitting the limits of Runway ML. Runway is a cool tool. It's really meant for folks who have no machine learning skills or like no coding skills or that sort of thing. And you might have started to like just feel like, oh, it's kind of expensive, or like I've seen other people that are maybe getting better results elsewhere. How are they doing that? So outside of SSHH, I do teach a number of other classes. Um, this year, my co-teacher Leah and I like sort of decided that we would like spend most of the pandemic teaching brand new courses, which was pretty exhausting, but also a lot of fun. So we went through just like a whole session. Basically, we started with a Runway class, and then we went all the way to the end of like writing your own code and training your own network sort of on a server. So we have a bunch of classes that are all recorded and up there. So I'll just talk through a couple of these. So the first one is this class called Make ML Art with Colab. Colab is this web page from Google it's kind of like Runway, except there's no GUI, there's no nice interface. It's a lot of code. It's usually what I recommend to folks after Runway because it's pretty affordable. If you want to like get into their like pro tools or their pro version of it, it's $10 a month. You get access to some pretty fast machines. There's some limitations in like how long you can run stuff for. All that's covered in this class. I believe it's a 3 or 4 week class. So this just links out to the YouTube videos of each course, and you can just sort of like, I think they're 2 hours each. Watch them at a 1.5 speed or whatever. And they should teach you like sort of the basics of getting up and running on Colab. Like Runway, Colab is one of those things where lots of people have contributed their own what they call notebooks, and you can access those notebooks and run them. Leah and I have made a bunch of notebooks and sort of shared them through some of the class links that are on there. So there is stuff like you can train your own StyleGAN model in Colab. It's kind of an annoying process. It's like basically your machine restarts every 20 hours. So you have to sort of like keep restarting it. But you can actually, we'll talk about like one of the StyleGAN classes that I taught. There is like a newer version of StyleGAN that I don't think Runway is using yet, that I find does have pretty good results. So you could try that. And again, $10 a month for pretty much infinite usage. So it's pretty nice in that regard. So check out that class if you're sort of looking for the next step. I will say the notebooks are like very code heavy. But one thing that Leah and I try to do with our classes is we try to like document the notebooks. Notebooks are basically, you can write a lot of text and then there's like these code cells you run. So you don't really have to know how the code works as long as you can read through the documentation. So it's pretty nice, and it's sort of the next step or the next iteration for folks who are ready to get off Runway. We also, I believe in September or something, taught this class on making data sets. So I know I linked to this previously for folks making data sets, but if you're interested in diving a little bit deeper into like making a custom data set, this actually ended up being a 4-week class because I added a 4th week on to show some like Illustrator and Photoshop tools to generate really nice data sets or like write scripts and that sort of thing. So if you found that like data sets were hard, but you're interested in like diving in deeper and trying to like unearth some new tools or other ways to approach it, I definitely recommend this course. There's lots of like also discussion about like, how do I determine if my data set is diverse enough, or how do I like, add additional elements to my data set. So there's a lot of like sort of tips and tricks that I've learned over the past 2 or 3 years of doing this, included in that class. So actually before Runway was sort of fully built out, I think they only released training maybe at the end of this year or the beginning of this year. I actually don't remember. So before the previous versions of SSHH were this class that I called AI 2.1. This is the first version I taught of it remotely, which happened in January. God, that feels like it was 3 years ago and it was only like a year ago. So this class will cover some additional things. If you've heard me talk about Pix2Pix or CycleGAN, or if you've heard me sort of trash the style transfer versions that are inside Runway, this is where there's a bunch of other stuff. So this course goes into using this server called Paperspace, which is basically, it's actually the Paperspace Runway, the Runway folks work out of the Paperspace offices, but Paperspace is like a machine you can rent hourly from Paperspace that can do machine learning and that sort of thing. The cost is like 75 cents an hour, so it's pretty expensive. But I go through a bunch of different tools you can use training directly on there. Again, it's a little bit more advanced than I would say the Runway classes. But again, I would say if you can follow steps, step by step, you don't really need to know the code that's going on behind the scenes, which is true of like almost all of my stuff. I would say very rarely do you need to know like code to be able to make it work. Sometimes you will hit errors, and when you hit those errors, you're welcome to like DM me or post in the more general Slack channels about errors, and usually someone can help you out with those things. Ideally, if you follow my steps perfectly, you shouldn't run into errors, but that never really ends up being the case. So, outside this class, you're always welcome to like message me and say like, hey, I ran into an error trying to run this on Colab. What's going on? Just know I am probably less or some slower to respond, but I usually will try to respond when I can. So this class was sort of the very first or second iteration of the SSHH classes, so it should still be like pretty accessible. But yeah, it's definitely a little bit heavier than just using Runway. So as I mentioned, there is a like new version of StyleGAN that came out about 2 or 3 months ago now. And I don't think they've yet implemented it inside Runway, but they probably will soon. It's called StyleGAN ADA. ADA stands for, I actually totally don't remember. I don't even remember what it stands for. Basically, there's a new process that helps generate better fake imagery using some additional techniques. And it's meant to work better with smaller data sets, which tends for most of us to be what we have, right? So they say it's good for, data sets of about 1,000 images, which is generally what I recommend for this class anyway, but like it really does work better for smaller data sets. So previous versions of StyleGAN had been trained on like data sets with like 50 or 70,000 images, which is really hard for most of us to get to. So if you go around and play with StyleGAN ADA, you might find that it works better. So this is again a 3-week class. It's just sort of like this one goes into a little bit more detail of how the model actually works. And then it sort of shows you a couple different techniques of places to use this, that sort of thing. So it's definitely a little bit deeper. Yes, Steve. So Steve, yeah, you should definitely do 50,000 drawings all on Twitch. Yes. StyleGAN ADA is just like it's a much improved version. And I find it works a lot better for small data sets. There's some annoyances with it that I sort of go into in the class. Basically, I started teaching this class the week after this new model had been released. So I kind of like was quickly updating it on my end as I was building stuff out. So I learned a lot as I was going through it. But it's definitely a cool library. And there's also, if you liked sort of the last week of class, which was more like generating videos and different ways of generating videos, there's a lot more here to go into how to do some of that on Colab, actually. Colab tends to be where I actually personally do most of my video production or like creating of images and video, just because Colab is a pretty quick service to use. So I have a bunch of like GPUs that I use personally for my own practice on a Linux machine here at my apartment. So those are mostly running trainings 24/7. And then when I'm generating stuff, I'll bring them into Colab to generate video and audio because it's sort of a quick hour-long process. So I don't really recommend that people like jump onto like building their own machines. One, because it's pretty expensive and it can get pretty complicated. But I would say like if you find that like 6 months from now you're doing this every day or like many days out of the week, you may find that it's more cost efficient to move to your own machine, which I do have some videos about, but like they're kind of out of date now. It's really hard to like stay up to date on all that stuff. But if you're interested, I'm happy to like give some options about how to do that. And then in like, I guess in March or April, Leah and I taught this class with Style. That was a StyleGAN deep dive. So it's sort of confusing because like this is the newest version of that class, but it's only 3 weeks and it mostly goes into training. Whereas this class is sort of like a 5 or 6 week long class that covers training and then covers a lot more of the image generation techniques. So I'd sort of recommend that you like watch this class and then skip the first 2 to 3 weeks of this class and go right to the like image generation stuff. In part because we cover like some of what ArtBreeder does, or we cover some additional like things you can't do within Runway at all to generate images and videos. So a lot of things we talk about in sort of like the last couple weeks of this class are what's called feature vectors. And feature is like, say you have a data set of faces and you want to like learn how can I make this face grow a beard, right? So I've got a face that has no beard on it. How do I add a beard? So that's like this idea of feature vectors. It's something that Photoshop's added a lot to their tools recently. but we go into a lot of like different ways to explore feature vectors, lots of different ways to manipulate them. We go into some deeper versions of audio reactive stuff. So if you found that cool, there's more there as well. And all this again, like sort of runs on Colab. So you should be able to just like manipulate stuff there. And the videos should still work. The funny thing about machine learning is like 6 months old means it plays like an era ago, and like lots of stuff changes really quickly. So you'll notice that like I would say 90% of the people in the StyleGAN channel and my current Slack thing are basically like, this thing broke, what happened? And it's just like, the thing is out of date now, and like you have to move, you have to like, I have to go either go fix it or I have to be like, move on to this thing. So it's kind of the challenge of a lot of this stuff is like, you do end up losing time just because they're like, oh, this like no longer works. I have to figure out how to fix it, or I have to find someone else to fix it, which is why lots of folks like Runway, because the Runway folks will fix it for you. So here it's a little bit more wild, wild west, and you're kind of on your own, but it's still pretty cool. And I find that 70% of the stuff is doable out of the box with the steps I give you, and then the other 25% is usually something I can fix and then update folks on pretty easily. So yeah, there's lots of comments and stuff. If you dig around in the other Slack channels, there's a StyleGAN channel, which is probably the most active one, just because that tends to be the thing that most people know me for, or like stuff that I've worked on before. So there's lots of tools in the wild that I've built, and then people come to me and say, "Hey, this thing is broken. Can you fix it?" And if I have time, I can, or if it's a part of my process, I can. But sometimes I just be like, I can't really do anything there. So, yeah. So these are all courses that we taught this year. And all the recordings are up. They should mostly link back to slide decks as well. If you're not seeing a slide deck or you want to know more, like just reach out to me and I'm happy to link to that stuff. So, all these are all on YouTube, and the price of admission is just paying for watching the ads, or if you've got an ad blocker, you get it for free. Yeah, so it's just like, I just find it's nice if I just like put that stuff up and then people can find it on their own and do whatever they want with it. So, but yeah, you're always welcome to reach out to me if you have other questions, or if you're like, hey, I was watching this video and I don't really understand it. I'm happy to like talk through that when I can. Is it a blank slide? What is this? Okay, I don't know what that slide is supposed to be. So if outside of the sort of the Derek Schultz ecosystem, there are some additional like places to check out videos. First off, Runway has a YouTube channel, and they post pretty frequently. Like I would say, like once a month or so, they're posting demos and tutorials on how to use their own tools. So I didn't really link to a lot of this stuff because it was sort of my job to like walk you through things. But if you are interested, there's some additional stuff on the Runway channel. Like I know we didn't really touch text generation or text training, and they cover some stuff in there. Lots of folks ask about the first order motion model, which is like doing lip syncing and that sort of thing, and they walk you through some of that stuff. Yeah, I just had to like sort of like decide what to teach in 4 weeks, and some things got cut, but Runway covers a lot of other stuff, so you might find there's some value on there. Gene Kogan, who actually does about 75% of the Runway videos, also teaches a thing called ML for Art. This links to one of his classes he taught maybe a year or two ago at ITP. And it's like a little bit more of a broader survey than like what I sort of do, which is just like image and video generation. He'll go into like motion tracking, text generation. He'll talk a lot about the theory behind this stuff and that sort of thing. So this is like a 10-week class, and every video is like an hour and a half long. It's really great. So if you're interested in like a little bit more of theory, or just sort of seeing a wider range of what's available to you, I definitely recommend that. And then if you're not familiar with Dan Schiffman is, he's a professor at ITP, and he has a YouTube channel called Coding Train, where he teaches sort of a wide range of stuff. Like he'll teach a lot of P5. So if you thought the P5 class was cool, but you want to learn more, he teaches a lot of stuff around P5. I think he was actually one of the founders of P5, like one of the folks who like sort of maintains it and keeps it up to date. So he's definitely a great person there. But he does have some classes about machine learning as well. So in addition to P5, there's another thing called ML5.js, which is running machine learning in JavaScript. It's not as powerful, but it is still kind of cool. So you can run machine learning directly in a web page. So he has a class on that. He's got a class just on like basics of machine learning, like that sort of thing. And he does some Runway videos as well. So those are probably like the big like YouTube channels that I'm aware of for things that are like valuable and good ways to learn. Like they're all educators, or they're all set up to like help educate you. Whereas there are some other machine learning videos out there that are more tutorials, or they're just like demos, and sometimes it can be hard to follow. I find that these folks are all pretty good teachers. Every once in a while, people are like, I want to learn a little bit more about machine learning outside of the art world. In which case I sort of recommend these 4 resources. Fast.ai is sort of like, it's kind of how I teach these classes in that like they're very hands-on. So it's run by two professors out of like San Francisco, and they're both really great. And there's like 3 or 4 different classes now of different things there. So if you're interested in like sort of exploring a much wider breadth of machine learning and learning code, like I definitely recommend checking that out. MIT Deep Learning, these are cool. This is just like a lecture series, and it's just like 10 lectures from professors as well as visitors, visiting guests lectures, and it's more theory. But if you're really interested in just sort of learning, I can't like these are like hands down some of the best stuff to just learn or like understand theoretical side stuff about it. There won't really be anything like to do, like there's no like demos or tutorials of this stuff, but it's just more like learning more survey level machine learning stuff. Andrew Ng's course is probably like the most famous machine learning course. Andrew Ng is like one of the bigger like machine learning people in the world. I think this course is like the most popular thing on the internet for machine learning. So it's like a good resource. These classes will be sort of a mix of like, you might get some math, you might get some demos, you might get some theory. It's kind of like a crapshoot. So depending on what you're interested in, you might find value in these, you might find them not valuable. It's sort of up to you. And the last thing I recommend is this book by this guy by the name of Francois Chalot. It's called Deep Learning with Python. I actually I really like this book because it's really clear. Like a lot of other books get really, really heavily bogged down in math or theory. And I find this book, like Francois created this thing called Keras, which is like one of the bigger machine learning libraries out there. But he just does a really good, succinct job of like explaining different techniques. So if you're interested in how does text machine learning work, how does, how does pix to pix work, or how do GANs work, in a little bit more depth than like maybe you would in one of my classes. This is a really great book. You could honestly read just the text portions and skip the code, and you would still learn a lot out of it. So some folks are just like not video people, and like I'm totally down with that. So this book is a good value if you're interested. Yeah, so there's definitely lots of stuff here to follow through on. I'll also say like what's nice about the machine learning community is it definitely feels a little bit more like a community than other places. So here's just a list of like cool people I think you should check out if you're interested. A list of artists. So Gene Kogan is, again, like he teaches ML4A, but he's also an artist himself. Mario Klingemann is probably one of the more famous machine learning artists out there in the world. Does lots of cool, weird stuff. Robert Luxemburg does a lot of like more audio visual stuff. So there's some cool work there. Scott Eaton is just like this amazing person who's both like a 3D artist, a figure drawer, and a photographer. And he combines them all into like these really weird machine learning models. Keisha Yuma also does some really amazing StyleGAN work. Sophia Crespo is, if you've seen my work before, like Sophia's probably like the closest other machine learning artist to making stuff similar to me. Anna Riddler is, again, another nice artist, and she did this really cool project a couple years ago, which was a GAN that generated flowers, but it was tied to like the Dutch floral stock market. So like some nice conceptual work as well. And David and Rafiq are both like really well-known machine learning artists as well. So you can check out their work. Sometimes they'll tell you how they make stuff. Sometimes they kind of keep it secret. It's just a sort of up to each artist. But I think you'll get some cool, interesting work there. Luba Elliott is a curator. She's like one of the first like real curators to dive into machine learning art. She runs the NeurIPS workshops every year. So actually they just finished a workshop this weekend. NeurIPS happens to be like one of the big machine learning art festivals, science organization things that happens every year. And every year they run like a more creative and art focused one. So they just finished that one. They did it on Saturday. And they put up a bunch of projects from people who submitted work. So I have a project in there. Some other former students of mine have projects in there. So there's lots of good inspiration on that site. I'll link to it in our Slack as well. Lots of cool stuff. And then a couple of music folks. I don't really know the ML music world that well, but there's like a burgeoning community there as well. This is, I think Leah pulled these together and put a couple names in here. So you can probably find some people in there that are cool as well. And then lastly, a little bit of a shameless plug for myself. Obviously you paid for this class already, so like you don't owe me anything, like there's no question here. But if you are interested in like learning more, or like just like I produce a lot of video. I produce like at least a video a week on YouTube that are sort of like external outside of my classes. So if you're interested in supporting that, I do have a Patreon, I do have a YouTube. Both of those give you like perks to things. You get like early access to my video recordings. You get discounts to my store. So I do sell prints as well as other things. And actually all of the classes that I do outside of SSHH are like basically purchased through my store. So I do live classes. It's usually about 10 to 15 people. And they run just like this course for like, 4 to 5 weeks, maybe a little bit longer. So those get announced through my newsletter or my website, or on the Slack channel. So you can usually sign up for those. And those are just first come, first serve. They don't sell out nearly as quickly as SSHH classes do, which is nice. So like you can just sort of like keep an eye on it. They usually sell out in a couple weeks, but not nearly like a couple hours, which the current SSHH ones are on. And I'll just sort of like, I usually add like a syllabus just about like, hey, here's what this class is going to be about. The one we're probably going to run in January will actually probably not be the best course for this group, just because it'll be about 50% runway and then 50% collab. So like, you don't really want to repeat the runway stuff, but if you watch those collab videos, that'll probably cover that. I'm just doing that because one, it's good to just like start people like in the new year, like they have a new, like, hey, I want to learn machine learning art. It's a nice way to start that class. And I'm also teaching at ITP in January. So it's like, I'm basically just teaching those two classes simultaneously. They're the exact same content. So it's like a nice way for me to like not lose my mind. There was a moment where Leah and I were teaching two classes every week on different content, and I would totally forget like what was what and which class learned what, and it just became a nightmare. So this way, we're just going to do the first quarter will just be like sort of like a basics machine learning class. So part runway and then partly on collab. So if you have friends who like are really thought what you did was at the SSHH was cool, recommend that class to them. We'll be announcing it probably in the new year. I'll probably also be doing another SSHH class sometime in January or February. I just don't know when yet. I usually talk to those guys after the new year starts. So yeah, so I mostly get new people through my classes, either through this or through recommendations. So I really appreciate if folks recommend these classes, because it generally like, one, cool people and they make cool things, and then they do cool stuff with the class, sort of like virtuous cycle. So really appreciate when folks can do that. And again, there's no pressure here to like sign up for any of these things. I just put them out there because if you don't announce it, no one does it. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. So also, like I will say, the YouTube channel, I add content pretty much every week of new stuff, like it's new demos or new things I found. So I'm going to do one thing actually tonight after this class is over. I'm going to record just like some of my favorite projects from Saturday's NeurIPS machine learning workshop, and just sort of highlight some cool things that I found through there. So again, folks can like sort of find new content and new inspiration through that. So that's it for the shameless plug.